Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining today and wanting to know about Lewy body. I can't see all of you on here because I know you're not on video. So I'm going to assume, because I can't see a show of hands from everybody, that the majority of people here don't know much about Lewy body, though I may be wrong. That's usually the case, but some of you may know something. So as Stephanie said, I'm founder of the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center, which I founded over 6 years ago after my mom passed away. And she had the disease for a long time and lived with me for the last 7 years of her life. So I really know the disease from the very beginning, when she couldn't do her checkbook many years ago till her last moment. And because I had been leading support groups for so long, I was really the only person in all of New York, after people saw physicians, who people would call, because after someone is diagnosed, then they had no place to go. And I really wanted to give one-on-one individual care, because this disease, as difficult as Alzheimer's is and Parkinson's is, the caregiver burden with this is even more so. And I'll explain that in a moment. The number one thing to know is that Lewy body dementia is not rare. Most people think it's rare because the majority of people still have not heard of it, unfortunately. I'm trying to make a difference every day so that that's not the case. But it is the second most common form of progressive dementia after Alzheimer's. And there are more people who have Alzheimer's than are HIV. There are more people who have Lewy body, than are HIV positive. There are more people who have Lewy body than ALS, cerebral palsy, and other diseases combined. It's just that it's just not heard of. And it's usually misdiagnosed, unfortunately, because it's misdiagnosed either as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease or psychiatric disorder. And I'll explain in a moment why it's so important to be misdiagnosed and why it is. But what I'd like to tell you first are what some of the symptoms are. And unlike some of the other diseases, Lewy body has a whole array of symptoms, unfortunately. So the main symptoms are issues with cognition, a little bit different than Alzheimer's, because people with Alzheimer's is all about memory loss. And people with Lewy body will have that as well, but a little bit later on. They have more problems initially with executive function, multitasking, numbers. And so that would be one of the early signs of having confusion, getting things mixed up. In addition to that, the majority of people have Parkinson's symptoms along with the cognition issues. And so for those of you who don't know what Parkinson's symptoms are, because I certainly didn't, I didn't know anything about this or any of the other diseases. And by the way, I do not have a medical background. I was executive assistant at the New York Times to the CFO for many, many years. And so the organizational skills is what helped me found my organization. But I have neurologists and geriatricians on my board. I've been to many conferences and speak to them all the time. And I've talked to probably thousands of people by now to hear what the differences are. So Parkinson's symptoms, it's not just a tremor in the hand, as many people think who don't know about the disease. There's stiffness in the arms and legs and a slowness of movement. And when you see people shuffling when they walk, they're not lifting up their feet. And they may have their chin jutting out and possibly have their mouth open. That is a typical Parkinson's look. My mom had that, but I didn't know it was Parkinson's because I didn't know what it looked like. So it took 3.5 years for my mother to be diagnosed correctly. And that was 20 years ago. more than 20 years ago, and still this is happening. So it's getting a little bit better, but that's why it's so important for me to bring awareness and to support families. So in addition to those cognition issues I mentioned and the Parkinson's symptoms, there are, and this is really key, fluctuations. Different than Alzheimer's, different than Parkinson's, is someone with Lewy body may be able to have a full conversation with you on what's going on in the world, and later that day, or even an hour later, or a few days later, may have difficulty in answering a simple question. And that changes from day to day. It could change from hour to hour. They can't put the words together. Sometimes they know what they want to respond to, but it takes time for them to connect what you're saying, and it takes time to respond. That's a big difference. So if there are fluctuations, there are a good chance that the person has Lewy body and not any of the other dementias. In addition to the fluctuations, the cognition issues and the Parkinson's symptoms, there are generally hallucinations. Many people with Lewy body will have hallucinations that are not frightening and will generally be children and small animals. They will see them, they're not frightened by them. They'll also see other things, but then there are other people who have very frightening hallucinations. And then those are the ones that is suggested for medications, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In addition to all of that, and I want to also mention with Parkinson's, there could be frequent falls because of the way that they're walking. That's also something to look out for if you see someone having balance issues, which is also part of Parkinson's. One of the early signs is a REM sleep disorder. And what that means is that a person, when we sleep and we're dreaming, our bodies are sort of paralyzed at night. So when you're running in your sleep or using your arms, you're not doing that in your bed. But when you have a REM sleep disorder, your arms are flailing. You could be moving your legs. And so if you're sleeping next to someone, it's very common to be punching the person next to you. And that is an early sign that can happen years before. And so is restless leg syndrome. When your legs keep moving, it's an early sign as well. Or also an early sign, as all of you know who deal with people with Alzheimer's disease, is a loss of a sense of smell. Could be 20 years earlier. And that is for many of the dementias, and not just Lewy body, but it is an early sign. Something I'm going to mention, which is never mentioned by people who talk about this disease, is a drippy nose. And I know some people with Alzheimer's can have that too, a constant runny nose. But the ones that people with Lewy body general have are the cognition issues, executive function, the Parkinson's symptoms, hallucinations, and the fluctuations. In addition to those, there is a visual spatial component. And what I mean by that is a problem with depth perception. So if they were driving a vehicle, it may be hard for them to see the curb and they may hit it. Or reaching for a glass right directly in front of you, but they may reach to the right. They can't tell exactly where it is. That happens sort of early on too, which is really important, why they shouldn't drive. In conjunction with all of that, and a very, very important thing to remember, why is it so important to be diagnosed correctly with Lewy body? There's no cure for Lewy body, then there's no cure for Parkinson's, and there's no cure for Alzheimer's at this time. So why is it so important? Is because people with Lewy body are extremely sensitive to medications, and given the wrong ones can make them much worse. So if someone is having a lot of Parkinson's symptoms, for instance, and they're given one of the medicines that work really well for someone with Parkinson's, only about, this is an estimate, 50% of people with Lewy body can take that without possibly having hallucinations from the med. More importantly than that, if someone is having very frightening hallucinations, they They really think someone's breaking into the house. They think there are strangers in the house. They see monsters. They need to have a medication to relax them because then they can become very aggressive also. Only certain types of antipsychotics work well for most people, and every person with Lewy body is different. So there's no across the board, if this happens, give this and this is going to work. It doesn't work like that because they're very sensitive. And so I'll mention this, though I don't have a medical background and I am not telling people what medicines to use, but one of the medications that nobody with Lewy body should be given is Haldol, because it can put them in what's known as a neuroleptic shock syndrome. It can make them much worse. And unfortunately, they'll still be giving that. I get calls on the helpline all the time, not all the time, but too often that people are still being given it, and they do get much worse. So that's why it's so important for me to talk about this and get the word out to many. So before I go on, because I know I said a lot, I'm wondering if anyone has questions at this point, because I would think this is the point that you may. And I'll add a couple of symptoms while you're thinking, because more additional symptoms are depression and anxiety. And for those, okay, and I'll say one more sentence. For those of you who don't know, it's the disease that Robin Williams had, but he never knew he had it because he was misdiagnosed with Parkinson's and depression. And so it was only found after autopsy that he had Lewy body, and he never knew what was happening to him. So yes, is it Dallas?
Yes, Dallas Hottie. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Dallas Hottie. I work for Heights and Hills. I'm a case manager. And my question is, how does one get Lewy body disease? How do they develop it? Is it hereditary? I don't know. How do they get it?
It is not considered hereditary, although I do hear of some families where there are others who have it. It is not considered an inherited disease. And when you say, how do people get it? Just like we don't know why people get Alzheimer's, and people can hypothesize why, nobody knows why at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Anybody else have a question at this moment? Is that Agnes? Agnes, do you have a question? If not, Agnes, can I ask you to put yourself on mute? Thank you. Okay.
I had a question.
Yes, Carol.
I assume you're going to get to it, but is it possible to definitely diagnose Lewy body dementia?
That's a really, really good question. So there are many tests that are done, many scans, and written tests and verbal tests. And what most of them do is eliminate what you don't have.
Mhm.
So there is a DAT scan, there's a PET scan. Not everybody has the machine that does a DAT scan, but many of the major hospitals in New York do. And again, it's not 100% definitive, but they can have a really good idea from doing these tests to know what you don't have, and then to hear the symptoms that I just mentioned. And what I'd really like to add to that is what's most important is to go to a doctor's appointment with the history of what's going on and not leave anything out. Because the reason it's so hard to be misdiagnosed, and I am telling you it so often, is first of all, generally it's only a neurologist who will know about Lewy body, and not all neurologists. I have to say that. I have to say that because not everybody specializes in it. So if they're, and that's why I want to get the word out to GPs, to ophthalmologists, to as many people as possible, to see what's happening. If someone comes and tells you that they're having eye issues, and then you pass, what happens is you pass the eye test, because it's about depth perception, which is not part of the general test. And then they send you on your way because they don't know otherwise. You're not seeing a REM sleep disorder in a doctor's visit.
Right.
You're not even going to see the fluctuations. And you may not notice, for all of you who work with people with Alzheimer's too, that in a doctor's visit, there's showtime. So people wake up in a doctor's office and a lot of times you can't see things going on. So, yeah, Carol and Letitia. Letitia, did you have a question?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. I have a question. What are the common symptoms of poor regulation of the autonomic nervous system? Because that's one also symptoms of body Lewy dementia, because my mother suffered from that. And sometimes when I try to explain to the doctors, they will contradict me and I will go like with a list of symptoms, but they will like deny that my mother was displaying those symptoms.
I feel for you, Letitia, because being denied what you know is happening is extremely frustrating and so far from rare, unfortunately. So thank you for mentioning the autonomic system, because that is another system that and more are symptoms. Lewy body dementia affects the entire body, which Parkinson's does in a way too, all the muscles. The autonomic system, again, without a medical background, I'll explain it in my way, is what happens is your blood pressure, well, that's part of it. Your blood pressure can drop and people pass out, and then people think that someone passed away right in front of them. The blood pressure drops, but it also affects all parts of your body. So it's affecting if you feel hot or cold. It can affect constipation is an early sign too. Then there can be diarrhea in conjunction with that. It affects all parts of the body. Letitia, did you have specific ones that
Yes,
your mom?
my mother presented her pressure will go really low. She will be always cold. And I reached to you specifically a year ago, and you helped me find out the list of symptoms. And I followed through with the geriatric, but I was able to get my mom treated for a year, but she passed away 2 months ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But in the end, I was able to cope with her symptoms and find psychiatric treatment. But it was really difficult getting confronted by neurologists, by geriatrics. But I was able to get a psychiatrist who helped me. But she passed away like with a pneumonia. But it was really painful to see how you get like rejected when you bring the list of symptoms and the doctors don't want to listen. So that has been a very painful situation when you're trying to advocate for somebody with body Lewy dementia. There's not a lot of knowledge among the doctors.
You are so right. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's what I was talking about. And I'll talk about that a little more about caregiver burden, because on top of dealing with all of this, with the memory loss, with the fluctuations, which what happens is with this disease, you don't know how one day is going to be versus another. With Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, you have a pretty good idea of what your day is going to be like, and you don't with this disease. You really don't. And then when you go explain something to this physician who is, not paying attention. But again, as you said, there are geriatricians who know this disease. I am glad to hear that a psychiatrist was able to help you, because, and again, I'm going to say this because I like to speak freely on the experience I hear from so many people. It's like there are many psychiatrists who don't understand this disease at all, and many people are given the wrong meds all the time. And I want to stress too that when somebody has this disease, and for elderly in general, no medications should be given more than one at a time, because then you can't see what's happening or if there's adverse reactions. I just had someone call the other day because this person's having hallucinations, and a doctor, she told me, a neurologist, gave 3 different meds. And one of them was Ambien. So again, I'm not a physician, but I can tell you, if you look at the geriatric associations, so the Society of Geriatricians, it's right on there that no elderly people should be given Ambien. So I'm speaking that because I feel so strongly that there's so much that people don't know. And we're in New York, you can imagine people who call from rural places and have no place to go. So I'm not on here to put anybody down, but just to share the lack of knowledge is astounding all around. And Letitia, I so feel for you because it's a lot to go through, but please know that if you ever want to talk, that I'm here, and there are so many others who unfortunately had that
Yes, and I
same
want to thank you
experience.
because you helped me last year when my mother was hospitalized. You helped me over the phone. And after I spoke with you, I was able to get resources, and I advocated for my mom for a year. So that made me feel, that I was able to do something at the end of my mother life. But that's why I'm getting these courses, and I hopefully want to become an advocate for others, because I don't want others to go through what my mother went through and I went through. But thank you.
I understand. That's exactly why I did it too. And for anyone who would like information, right, on my website, which I can put in the chat and I'll mention it at the end. It's the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center. The short version to get in so that you don't have to type so much is lbdny.org. And I'm mentioning it now because there is on the home page of the website, if you just scroll down a little, there is a medical alert card that can be printed out, and it mentions all the medications, including over-the-counter meds as Benadryl, that can make them much worse. So it's very, it can help. I'm just reading I'm sorry, I didn't see them before, some of the texts. Is it possible that vivid, bizarre dreams without REM can be an early symptom? And if my answer, Judy, would be, are they dreams? Are they half up? Are they half awake and half dreaming? I'm not sure how to answer that. I would say, I'm just going to guess that it's a possibility. Did you want to say anything further on that, Judy? I'm just looking on here, but if not, it's okay.
No, nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thomas, you mentioned there are meds for those who have frightening hallucinations. Can you share a list? That's something that, again, because I'm not a physician, would be best for me. I'm not suggesting meds. What I will say, for those who need to know, the one that works best for many people, of course, not all people, the one that neurologists tend to use and people say work best for some is Seroquel. It's an antipsychotic, it's a strong medicine, but for those who need something for frightening hallucinations, that's the one that generally works the best. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for all. Okay, what is general age of onset and progression? I want to say it's about the same as for Alzheimer's disease. So generally about 75, early 70s and above. However, there are people with earlier onset, and I'm getting more and more people contacting us who have it in their early 60s. And of course, there's some earlier as well. Any other questions at the moment?
I would have a comment that my wife is, we're not sure if it's Lewy body, but it seems to be. And our neurologist did put her on Seroquel, and it made a big difference in, her, delusions. We would call it delusions rather than hallucinations. She thinks she is Capgras syndrome, which is
Capgras syndrome.
Capgras, yeah. So it's like she thinks I'm someone who
You're
is
an imposter.
pretending. Yes, I'm an imposter. So it's not like Alzheimer's, she doesn't know who I am. She sees me as someone who is pretending to be me. And so then I can go out of the room and re-enter, and I could usually emerge. But the Seroquel has helped with that. And that definitely made a difference.
I'm happy to hear that because
Yeah.
it doesn't work for everybody for Capgras syndrome. Others
Yeah.
will try it. So, and for those of you who don't know what Capgras is, and it's spelled CAPGRAS,
Right,
it's, I think it's a Frenchman's name.
yes,
And what it is, it's exactly as Dan said, people will view, usually it's their spouses, and so many times it's their spouses of over 50 years that they say, oh, you're the bad Dan, what happened to the good one? And they will think they can't distinguish. And that one, I want to say, Dan, that there are also symptoms that come and go. And I think Capgras can be one of those. It could
Yes.
be just happening right now for a while, and it may
that's what our
disappear.
neurologist said. And it's not necessarily an indication of Lewy body, but in your opinion, can it be connected to Lewy body?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, that's,
Again,
I think,
without a
that-
medical background, I would say
Yeah.
I've read like 25% of people with Lewy body. There's a lot of people who call with that. And
Yes.
then statistically, people would say, well, maybe those are people who are calling you, but I just have heard it, too many times.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. There's also something called reduplicative paramnesia, which is, and my mom had this, that she said, how did they get this apartment to look like the other one? How did they
Yes.
get all the same furniture here like in the other one? It's a little different than Capgras, but it's seeing duplicate things.
Yes, that's what she has too. Sometimes our apartment, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
Okay.
related, yeah.
Yeah, if it wasn't such a devastating disease, I mean, it's a very interesting and devastating disease because of everything, of so many things that happen with it. But I'm glad the Seroquel is helping her for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question at this time? Sure, Donna.
Thank you for this, important discussion and conversation, Norma, and facilitating this information. It is so important that folks share information that's so relevant as part of medical history. It's like we are so important as part of the process for loved ones, family members, other caregivers, as part of biomedical history, psychological aspects, social aspects, how are folks engaging, connecting. And it kind of brings up the point to me too, thinking about sleep-related disorders, which also are pretty common, that, so many people may have either excessive daytime sleepiness, other related factors impacting essentially the brain's ability to detoxify. If someone isn't sleeping well, it just can seem to create a lot of worsening symptoms. At least that's what we see from a neuroimaging perspective. I know that PET, and also something that we do with Brain Spec, looks at a window of activity and blood flow. The functional imaging gives a window of insight. But if the brain can't detoxify because a loved one does not get good quality rest or sleep, it just makes things much more worse when it comes to some of the symptoms. So it's such an important pillar of health. I think that comes up again and again. Folks may be waking up multiple times per night or just getting into that deep sleep. And that too can contribute to some of the delusions or hallucinations or, adversely impact memory or mood. So.
Yes, and then there are others who are not sleeping well and need help with that, and other medications are given for that. But yet there are others, then as you said, the daytime sleepiness is very common for people not to just take one nap, but 2 naps or 3 naps, because the sleepiness is another symptom, the daytime sleepiness, and they can't help it. And one of the other symptoms I'd like to mention, which is very prominent and also not usually paid attention to, is apathy. When someone shows no interest in doing something, or I can't get up and I don't want to do that now. It may appear that they're lazy or that they don't want to help with something, or that no, they don't want to be bothered. That is part of the disease too. And that will come out, I'm sure, as something, it's very prevalent and they can't help it. They want to go do something, but they just can't do it. They can't bring themselves up to do it. Any other question before I go to another topic? Okay, so those are the major symptoms and, you know, why it's hard to diagnose. And we talked about the meds and we talked about the caregiver burden. So I thought also, yes, progressing differently. But what I wanted to talk about now is maybe helpful hints on daily interaction suggestions for those who do have it. And many of these are the same for people who have other types of dementias as well, is that a routine really works well. It always helps. Being patient is huge. It's one of the most difficult things for family caregivers who are caring for someone all day long, every day. It's so hard, but it's one of the things that's needed for people with all dementias. And I want to say not giving too many choices. So if you have 4 flavors of ice cream, I would ask them maybe just name 2 of them. Just makes it easier for them not to have too many choices. However, you want them to feel in control. If I had to share 2 pieces of information to everyone, is 2 things are so important: that they feel safe. Everyone needs to feel safe. And that's why many times they will cling to one person, usually a spouse, or could be a daughter like Letitia. They're clinging to one person who makes them feel safe because they need that, because they have no control over what's happening. But at the same time, the second thing I would suggest is they need to feel in control, as we all do. So we may know best, but not to say all the time, no, you have to take a shower now and then you have to get dressed, or however you're saying that. Is we need to give them a choice, and we need to change our schedule to match theirs many times, because we may want them to take a shower at, oh, it's time at 10 a.m., but they don't feel like that at all. And it may work better for them at 1 o'clock after lunch or something like that. So to work with their schedule, and also to know, to have them say, would you like to take a shower now? Or would you like to wait a while? Why don't we wait a while, and as soon as, say things, whatever you can, having them feel safe and know that you're caring for them, but also that they have a choice in what's happening to them is important. And of course, trying to find something to keep them busy is, and it's not easy for someone who has Lewy body, because someone who used to read, say, the whole New York Times, my mom was one of them, and then would just stare at the front page because they can't go further than that. Or watching a movie, and please don't have your loved ones watch Law and Order. Like everybody loves to watch it, but because what happens is when they're in a show like that, they become one of the people in the show. And you don't want them to watch any violent shows, anything that you can do to watch a comedy, anything with music. Music is hugely helpful, as with other dementias as well. Even, I mean, with Alzheimer's, it still astounds me that you can have someone who no longer speaks but can sing. Music works on the other part of the brain and can help so much. If you find that someone is having hallucinations or delusions, you never want to argue with somebody who's doing that. You want to redirect them. Change the topic, change rooms, put on music, show pictures, bring in a pet. Do anything you can to change the topic that they may be obsessed on, because that's another thing. It's kind of like an OCD thing. They can get stuck on things. And many times redirecting can work. It will never work 100% of the time, but that's what to try most of the time. And if someone is having hallucinations and delusions that are not the frightening kind, that you're able to just go along with, rather than say, no, there's no dog in here, then say, okay, the dog is here and I'm going to let him out now. Just go along with it, have them feel safe, and now you're letting the dog out. but not say there's no dog in here, because that's their reality. I want to say also that if there are abstract paintings on the wall, or say a tall lamp, for people who have Lewy body, because their vision is different and they're having these hallucinations, they may find these objects to be distracting, and they may think the lamp is a stranger. They may see different things in a pattern in a carpet or in a painting. So to be aware of that, when you see something like that, it's best to have things that are more plain and easy. And they are very bored because they can't do a lot. So anything you can do by you have a new person visit, they'll wake right up. And they're going to use all the energy they can just in a doctor's office to wake up and be bright, but just know that the next day they'll probably be sleeping the whole day, because they used it all up, and now that part is gone. No loud noises. They're really sensitive to noise and really bothers them. I'll give you two more things that I'm thinking about. If you're having people visit, say for one of the holidays, it's very distracting for them to have many people around them, because if there are too many conversations going on, it's overstimulation and it bothers them. So many times they'll want to get up from the table or where they were sitting and go, say, take a nap or go into another room because it's too much. It's better if they're in a small group with one conversation, feeling safe and being able to follow that. Lastly about this, I have found this over the years by myself on my own. They're very sensitive. I think all people with dementia are, to energy. And so if you're frustrated or angry, they feel that a lot. They can really feel if you're upset. But if you are being patient, if you're being loving and kind, like all of us want every day from people that we're dealing with, it goes a long way, and they can feel that even more strongly than anything else. That's my really more than 2 cents on that. Does anyone have any questions on this? No. Okay. So if you need more information, I know I gave you a lot of information, but please know that the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center has the only live helpline for Lewy body in the United States. And I will put that in the chat, and I'll also say it. We have the 516-218-2026. And then we also have 833 LBD line. They both go to the same place, but you have a choice of numbers. That helpline is available 7 days a week, 365 days a year, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And we offer support groups specifically for caregivers of people with Lewy body. And we also have support group, and this is all by Zoom at this time still. We have support groups for people who have Lewy body, and that's a national group. So anyone can join that. And I can tell you, in all my years of doing this, my mom had Lewy body for 18 years. And one question people didn't ask is how long it usually goes. They say that most people have it from 4 to 8 years, then they changed it to 7 to whatever. But the truth is, it's anywhere from 2 to 20 years. And it's different with every single person, depending what other physical ailments are, depending about your environment, it's depending on the care that you get, etc. So my mom had it for 18 long years, which is not the norm. She was bedridden for the last 8 years of her life. She lived with me. And that's why it was so important for me to found the resource center, because besides having the support groups on the website, you will find really hundreds and hundreds of resources and information. So you won't just find information on Lewy body, you'll find information on caregiving for anybody who's a caregiver, on, say, meal deliveries, veterans information, PTs, OTs, etc., alternative information, and then resources for doctors and attorneys and things like that. That's on there. And this, I have to say that I have learned more this year from the people who have Lewy body in the support group than I've learned before, because it's from a whole different perspective. And I'm saying, oh my God, I now have 2 people on my board who have Lewy body. And I said, I can't believe I never had them before. I have a Lewy body organization. It's like having an organization for, you know, I don't know. I'm so glad to have them on board, and I'm learning so much, and we're trying to bring as much awareness as possible every day. And our tagline is bringing awareness, supporting with love. And when I founded the organization, I heard some people say, well, maybe you don't want to use that word love, maybe support or something. And I said, no, I want to use that word. That's exactly what I want to use. And I want individual care. So please know that if you need any information, we're here for you anytime. You can always, I'll give you my email address too, if you have any questions. It's norma@lbdny.org. And I'll be happy to help anybody who needs it. And I thank you all for attending today and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norma, so much for presenting today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Really helps.
Thank you. Nobody else has any questions? I will hear from you whenever you need it. Yes, Donna.
You have a newsletter as well, or?
Yes, we do. We have a monthly newsletter, yes. And if you, either you can send me an email to norma@lbdny, or right on the website, if you scroll down, it'll tell you to sign for the newsletter right there.
Okay, that would be fabulous. I would love.
Thank
to
you for
see-
reminding me. Yes, we have a monthly